don't look at what you have. That's a very wrong way to look at it. Actually look at what you can contribute.
Welcome to Tech Inspired. My name is Priska and I am your host today. With this podcast, we want to inspire and empower more women to start a career in tech. We interview on a regular basis exciting guests from the tech industry who share their stories, insights, and career advice. Let's get started to build your best career in tech.
Okay, great. Today I'm welcoming Reshma with us here at the podcast. We actually follow each other on LinkedIn for quite a while, and I was really impressed by your CV on LinkedIn as well and the work you do around the topic of diversity and inclusion and equity in the tech industry. And that's why I thought it would be a great opportunity to learn more about you and welcome you here to the podcast. So thanks a lot for joining us here, and maybe you can give a little bit of an insight about yourself at first now.
Thanks so much for having me, Priska. And as you rightly said, I follow you as well and all the inspiring things that you do within Switzerland and also in the frame of women in tech. Just to give a very quick introduction about myself, I'm originally from India and I've lived about 22 years now, half of my life, in fact, outside of my home country. I'm an engineer by education with both a bachelor's and master's degree in technology. As a lot of engineers do, I went and got myself an MBA because, tech by itself wasn't sure, at least back then, how much of value it has. You always need to have the managerial kind of skill set as well. I have been in the tech industry now for 22 years. And when I say tech, different industries, but very much in the tech space. So power and energy, mainly oil and gas, consulting, and now I'm with a very different industry, which is around staffing and talent advisory. I have a very international background. I've lived in 13 countries across 3 continents. I'm a mom. So I think one of the questions that still women get asked is how do you balance? Very proud to say that, my 14-year-old is also very much into tech. So a lot of things that we kind of on a day-to-day basis also discuss and progress forward as well at home. So just not my professional life.
That's great. I would like to start actually always with the beginning of your life. Was there anything in your life as a kid, as a child, that triggered you to go into the tech industry, or how was your upbringing?
It's always an interesting question. And, I have to say, when you listen to all these amazing women who talk about, how they had a very clear idea about getting into tech, doing, engineering stuff. I don't have any of those fascinating stories to tell, unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you look at it. So I grew up in India in the rural part. And, for those of who are familiar with the rural part of India, and it's a very, also a society which is very patriarchal. I have to say, thankfully, I grew up in both a society as well as a family where the education of girls was valued. So my parents, my family encouraged us to get an education and a good education. However, I didn't have any role models to look up to, who were engineers or who were in the, let's say, the tech space, so to say. I was pretty good at mathematics. So I've always scored 100% in math. And it was kind of, given that, you would pursue a STEM education. So more, I would say, either technology, engineering, or mathematics. So not so much around science, not biology or chemistry, but it was kind of societal norm. Let's say if you're good in math, you actually pursue one of those. And I would say that kind of sat with me, that I was very proud of the fact that I'm good at math. And second, again, I'm talking about 2 decades back, right? If you wanted to be financially independent, you could not actually pursue a degree in literature and think that you would be financially independent. So what a career that would have given me financial independence was definitely around tech. So again, as I said, it's nothing fascinating that, I knew what exactly I wanted to do. For me, it was a love for math and being good at it. I think it's mutual. You love it because you're good at it. You're good at it because you love it. It's a chicken and egg kind of story. And second was, what's the fastest way to be financially independent? That was my foray into, let's say, engineering as an undergraduate subject. And from then on, I have to say there's been no looking back.
You mentioned before that you also did then a master's degree, but I assume between the MBA and your bachelor's degrees, you were working in the tech industry as well, or what was then your first job?
My first job with a large engineering conglomerate in India. And, again, I was one of the first women to join in a mainstream engineering. The thought process of getting an MBA was more because I think the stereotypical bias against women. One, in terms of just you being an engineer and you are good at engineering, so the technical part of the job itself. And second, also, I always say this, it's not so much about women in tech, it's actually about women in leadership. When it comes to leadership, women in decision making, I think there is still, and 20 years later, I have to still say we do have that bias of saying, can women really be decision makers? Can women really be leaders? And MBA was a way for me to break the bias. So you are not looked at only as an engineer who's good at doing the designs and who's good at doing, the technical stuff, but sit in a corner, don't take credit, keep your head down, just do stuff. And there's somebody else who's actually going and selling it, so to say, the phase of it. I didn't want to be one of those. And I said, an MBA would actually open up my mind in terms of the commercial aspects, in terms of data, in terms of insights, in terms of just understanding finance and all of that, which is completely, let's say, non-engineering, non-tech. So I did my MBA after, let me think now, I think it was after 4 years of work experience. And I have to say that was one of the also the best decisions I took. Because what also we don't realize when we get into tech is, tech is not just about doing the technical stuff. It's actually about what I call as tech for good. It's probably something like fundamental research versus applied research. So it's actually about applying technology for the greater good.
Absolutely, I fully agree with you on that point, and I think it's you did the way of being in the tech space first, and then doing the management part or leadership part. But there are also a lot of women who actually start vice versa. So because they get the message, or they've been told they're not good at tech or not good at math, they start first with a different degree, which is more on the management side. Then they think about going into the tech industry. What would you recommend if someone would do it the other way around? Is this a way to go as well? And what should these people do? Should they also go back to university and do a master's in computer science? Or what would you recommend?
I'm going to take a step back and also first answer what is tech? And I think this is really a myth that we have that, if you don't have a computer science degree, for instance, you are not in tech. No, I don't think that's a right definition. When we actually look at tech today, there is a broad range of technology itself. I would say, think about the mobile phones that we have. If you know how to use your mobile phone and all the apps that is there, if you really know how to use it, I would say you're tech literate. I would say that you understand tech and you are even operating in a tech space. So the definition of technology has significantly changed in the past 2 to 3 decades. So that's something that I would qualify before I answer the question directly. I personally don't think there is a right or wrong approach to it. That you start with, let's say, an engineering degree and then you move into a managerial space, or you start with something completely that is non-tech and then you move into the tech space. I think what is really important to understand is we are living in a tech-enabled world, and there is no denying that. And as we look at all the industries, take the shoes that you wear. You would think you are buying a shoe. Are you really buying a shoe? If you look at Adidas, Nike, On shoes, are you really buying a shoe, or are you buying something more than a shoe? So my take on the whole evolution of world, I would say, any industry, is you're not going to be in a business that is actually going to say you're selling shoes or you're selling cakes. Take bakeries, for instance, you're selling cake. You are actually in a world where you are in a digital tech space, however, specializing in something. So from that perspective, if you really see, there is no right or wrong in that sense. And doesn't matter what your start point has been. You could have completely started with, having a degree in English literature. And you could actually see, how stories sell. What are the stories that sell? What are the words that sell? Search engine optimization. This is very much tech, but you need to have an understanding of the language, understanding of the words. So my advice to anyone who wants to get into the tech space is don't look at what you have. That's a very wrong way to look at it. Actually look at what you can contribute. Actually look at your skills, your expertise at the moment, and think about how technology can enable that, again, as I said, for the greater good.
I think this is very important. I have the same experience when I talk to women interested in going into the tech space. They always ask, so how do I find my area where I could fit in? And it's like, it's check your daily life, what's fascinating for you, and you will sure find something that has to do with tech in this area, like from art to, as you mentioned, buying shoes. So it's everywhere is tech, and I think that's really fascinating. So getting back to your career, you said something before which I think was very interesting. You were the first woman in a man-led stream. How did you deal with this situation? How did you handle it? What was it the impact for you at that point in time? You were very young as well. You just fresh graduated. How did you deal with the situation?
So I think, the good thing about youth is ignorance. So when you're 22 and you have topped your class and you join a completely male-dominated organization, you don't see that. You just don't see that. You actually think you're the top talent. You are really someone who is excelled or good at what she does. That's what you see. And I think that's why I said ignorance is good sometimes. I just didn't see. I had joined a male-dominated industry. I just didn't see. There were only men around me. I just saw what I was actually good at doing. I think it hits you hard later point in time. And I can tell you, I'm middle-aged now. It hits me hard now how much, average mediocre men can advance themselves compared to women who are really, really good. So back then, I have to say, I just didn't see. The reality struck me hard the first time. I think it was 2 years after I had joined. And, as I said, we were a large engineering conglomerate, and a lot of our work happened at construction sites. So I had worked in power generation. So you have these large turbines, which you install in a power plant, which is typically remote. I was working in Doha in Qatar. And this was a large desert, like completely 90 kilometers out of Doha as a city. And my job was to install these large turbines. And when I landed there, I realized that there were no women's toilets. This is the first time it hit me that, oh, I'm different. Because there were no women's toilet, because you don't expect women to be you don't expect women to be in a sector like that, in an industry like that. Second, you don't actually expect a 23, 24-year-old to land there. So all the toilets were for men. And I had to travel 9 kilometers to a gas station just to use the ladies' room. So this is when I would say 2 years after I joined was the first time it really hit me hard. And I said, this really makes me feel I'm different. And this also shows how the industry, which is typically male dominated, is not even prepared to accept a woman into that stream.
Mm-hmm. How can we change this today? I mean, we talk a lot about, we also want to hear career advice from our guests. And I think this is maybe not specifically with toilets, but nowadays we have a similar situation where you get into a room, where you get into a job, and people don't realize, oh, there are people thinking different than, or being different than the average white male person. What would you recommend if someone gets across such a situation? How can we help improving this situation?
So, my own experience, and as I said, I've been living outside of my home country for 22 years, mostly in Western Europe. It's not only the fact that I'm a woman, I'm also probably even one of the, I don't even want to say one of the few, one of the women of color. So you're right, you walk into a room and you have double bias. You are a woman of color, you are a woman and you are a woman of color. And my advice to anyone, independent of what your difference is, sometimes we are the minority in the room. And the first step I would say is to accept that. So as I said, when I was 22-year-old and joined my first job, I didn't even see that. I didn't even see that, I was surrounded by middle-aged men. I just didn't see that. So I'm not saying it in a negative way. I think first thing is to accept that so that you are not in for a shock. These days when I go for a meeting, especially when no one knows me, I'm actually prepared that, somebody is going to ask me to fetch coffee. Most of us as women, when we have been in those senior positions, chairing a meeting, we have gone through this. So I'm actually prepared. I'm also prepared with an answer. So it's more about how firm your answer is It's not a question of accepting that, yes, I will be asked to fetch coffee and I fetch coffee. No, I've never fetched coffee. It's actually about knowing what to respond. That's the first thing I would say. And the second thing, this is also what I feel is sadly how society works on our minds. So most of us accept. And I have to say, in my 22 years, there has been several moments when I have asked myself, is it easier for me to accept? Because it's a constant fight. If you're actually looking for a change, there is no fairy godmother. There is no Cinderella godmother who comes, waves a wand and, things change. No, we are the change agents. We are the change makers. And how many of us accept that? Because, change is never easy, right? We are always questioning the status quo. And I know male colleagues of mine who dislike me for the fact that I always say, okay, where are the women? And this is like a common theme. And sometimes I get stereotyped saying, oh, if Reshma is in a meeting, she's definitely going to bring up the women issue. And that sometimes sounds very negative. And there are times when I've asked myself, is it even worth the fight? And I would say for anyone who's going through that at the moment, first remember that you're not alone. So find a group. And I would, for women in Switzerland, I strongly recommend Priska's group. Be part of it. You will hear a lot of us having gone through that. And there is a power in that conversation, in knowing that you're not alone. Second, don't give up. Think about it. Today, we are all here sitting and talking about women in tech because of the women before us. They did their part. That's why and third, there are days, and accept that there are days when you feel hard, I have cried and I have, wanted to leave, let's say, not only the tech space, but also the corporate world, because it's hard. I always remind myself that it's hard because it leads to something that is beautiful, that's something that's leading to wonderful. So accepting those days that is hard and not painting a rosy picture, when we see women having reached, women CEOs, for example, we think, oh my God, they made it, they had a rosy life. No, I don't think that's true. It's accepting that it's hard, but enjoying that hard part of it, because there is a sweet fruit that's going to come at the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very good advice. I think it's important to have this group of people around you, seeing that you're not alone in the struggle. Just knowing already that you have someone else experience the same gives this kind of energy to yourself, and knowing, okay, we're fighting together in this for having a better world for our daughters. I mean, you're a mother as well. I'm not sure if you have a daughter or son, but even if it's also a son, it's for our kids and making the world better for them. That's great. And you are in a leadership position now. You've been through many different leadership positions, and I'm sure you experienced as well the so-called glass ceiling. What is it that you could recommend anyone who is now in a position saying, okay, I want to do a step forward, I want to go up into a leadership position, also with the thought of being able to change more from a leadership position? What would you recommend someone if they would like to go in this direction?
See, and as I said at the beginning, I think there is generally a bias towards women taking leadership role, because, decision making historically has been the forte of men. So I think the society, even as women, think about it. And today morning, I actually did a LinkedIn post where I caught my own unconscious bias last week, where a woman CEO was appointed and I just didn't see it. My brain didn't capture it. So even us as women, sometimes it's hard for us to break the bias in our minds of women in decision-making roles. That said, today, fortunately, we have a lot of role models. We have a lot of women who are in leadership positions, tech, non-tech, and I don't make that distinction, but women who are in decision-making roles across industries. And for every woman who's aspiring to get into a leadership role, I would say, and I'm not discounting, trust me, I'm not discounting the external barriers. There are external barriers, external stereotypes, biases, all of that, yes. I truly believe that 50%, at least, if not more, at least 50% of the self-rejection comes from us on our own. So we think, especially when society hands it down to us and questions us, do you really deserve that seat at the table of this decision making? More often than not, I've seen women accepting that and limiting themselves. So my sincere advice to all the women out there is, one, be ambitious. There is nothing to be shy about ambition. We should be ambitious. That's one. And I can also tell you that the more you're ambitious, think about it. How many of your peer group, how many of the women in your circle, you like it when they're ambitious? So that's a stereotypical bias. That is a societal bias we have. We don't like ambitious women, period. Right? So change that narrative in your head as well, because we should like ambitious women and we should be ambitious. That's the first thing I would say. Second, don't give up. There may be first time, second time, and I get a lot of LinkedIn messages as well where they say, I've tried 4 times. And I always ask, why not the 5th time? So go for it. You are ambitious. You know that you can do it. Don't reject yourself. 4th time, 5th time, maybe it's the 10th time, doesn't matter. And yesterday I saw again a LinkedIn post where there was an article about a young woman. She was rejected 300 times. And then she got internship with Tesla, with Facebook, with Google, you name it, right? 300 times. How many of us would have had the persistence to go 300 times? So my, again, sincere advice is, be ambitious, do not be shy, do not feel guilty. It's great to be ambitious. That's the point. And then if you're ambitious and you truly believe in your ambitions, don't self-reject, don't self-limit. No matter how many times you're rejected, just go for it.
Great, absolutely. I love it. It's a lot about our view on the world as well, and I think that's very great advice to give. This is about women in tech, so I would like to go back to the tech topic. You've been in different tech industry. You're now in the recruiting industry or talent management industry. What is your take in regards to technology? Where is technology heading, and where do you think could be a great space for anyone to get into, because it's going to be an interesting, exciting, growing market?
So see, again, I'm going to split this technology into 2 parts. One is the hardcore technology itself, the laptops that we use, the phones that we use. These are all what I call as the hardcore technology. And it has evolved like dramatically, right? Think about the times even 10 years back. Today, we operate our entire lives from phones, our mobile phones. So that's the hard part of technology, the hardware itself. And then there is, how do you use technology to enable anything? And I would say, for people who are scared of the hard part of technology, when you think about, developing chips, writing programs or codes, if that scares you, think about how technology can enable things. And I give an example from my own current job at the moment. We are in the talent management, talent advisory space. And probably a more rudimentary term is staffing and recruitment. And if we were able to capture all the data, that all of us, individuals like us, what is your career aspirations? What have you done in the past 10 years, 20 years, 5 years, doesn't matter. And if you're able to create these career journeys for you digitally and help you manage that, that's the enabling part of tech. So for people who have, again, no interest or fear the hard part of tech, I would say go for the soft part of tech. And technologies, as I said before, technology is here to stay. There is no part of our lives that is not going to be disrupted. Touched for sure. We are all now highly and heavily dependent on tech. But I would also say we are heading in the direction of every part of our lives is going to be disrupted by technology. So even if you are not interested, again, scared of the hard part of technology, go for the soft part. Think about how technology can enable anything.
And I think this is a very good area as well. I mean, when you talk about hard and soft part, I don't think soft part means programming per se, if you think about software engineers, but really the connection between how can we bring the technology into society for good, as you mentioned earlier as well. Thank you very much for sharing all this information, all these insights with us. That was very inspiring, and I think we could talk forever for more advice and insights. But we're getting to the end of this podcast, and I would love to ask you some speed questions before we close the podcast. And I just want you to answer with what's on top of your mind. So the first one is, who is your favorite female role model?
Indra Nooyi.
Yeah, and some more insights. Why?
The former CEO of PepsiCo. And why is she my role model? One, we share the same background since she originally grew up in India. And again, women in leadership. She's one of the first women of color heading Fortune 500. And for me, it's truly inspirational, how she has literally risen up the ranks and made it to one of the biggest Fortune 500 companies of the world as CEO.
Yeah. I was reading, she has a book about her life, and I was reading it on Blinkist, just a short summary of it. Very interesting. I should share this link as well. The next one is, what is your most important skill?
My most important skill is people management, because I'm
Mhm.
also someone who truly believes that, whether it's a tech or non-tech, you can only get the full potential by inspiring people, by getting people to contribute to your vision. If I can do that, because single, you don't go that far alone. You actually go very far with a group of people. So I would say my biggest skill is actually bringing people together, making them collaborate, and working towards a common goal or a common vision.
Mhm. Very good. And the last one is, what was the best advice you were ever given?
The best advice I was ever given, and this is also the advice that I actually paid forward, so to say, is not to self-limit yourself.
And I
Because
think,
I believe that all of us, independent of our backgrounds, all of us have those self-limiting beliefs. That's what keeps us small. If you want to grow, get over your self-limiting beliefs. Get out of your comfort zone. Your target should be the growth zone. So move into your discomfort zone.
absolutely. And I think that's a great ending to this podcast. Thanks a lot for being our guest today and sharing all your insights and story. Thank you very much.
Thanks again, Priska, for having me.
Did you enjoy this episode? Don't forget to comment or rate us on your podcast app. Never want to miss an episode again? Sign up now for our newsletter on techface.ch or follow us on Spotify or wherever you are listening to podcasts. Stay tuned and build your best career in tech.